So, hi everyone. I've met most of you before. My name is Garrett Hitchings. I'm a second year MPA, Master of Public Administration student at the Kennedy School. And I'm originally from Scotland, and I'm now a Canadian. And my studies at the Kennedy School have focused on strategic management and management of nonprofits and this kind of work. So, thank you very much for hosting us.
My name is Brett Long. I'm a second year Master's in Public Policy from New Orleans. I'm actually not a member of this class. I took this class a year ago, but I've been doing some independent research with Professor Dutch Leonard that's kind of overlapped with this. So any credit for this presentation really goes to the other three.
Hi everyone, I'm Rick Kelberg. Spent the first part of my career as a pilot in the U.S. Air Force, and the latter part of my career as a derivatives consultant for a small consulting firm outside of Philadelphia. I have my MBA from Wharton, and I'm here for a one-year program for the mid-career program. And as of last Friday, I accepted a job to work at an alternative energy firm. It's a wind turbine manufacturer up in the Boston area, so I'm super excited about that.
Cool, congratulations.
Bring a couple down. Bring a couple samples down.
We got wind to beat the band here.
They let me in there, so you can't be all that sharp.
I think they've tightened things up.
I hope so.
Couple of years.
I majored in beer.
Hi, I'm Catherine Leland, also a second year Master in Public Policy student. I'm from Virginia originally, but have been lived in LA for 7 years prior to coming to Boston, where I worked as a policy director for a business advocacy organization, and then also was assistant city manager for a very small city in southeast LA County. And then I came to the Kennedy School, so thank you for letting us be here today.
You're on, Gary.
We know.
Yeah. Oh, you want me to introduce myself? Thank you. So I'm Jennifer Nash. I am Associate Director of a research center at the Kennedy School called the Mossavar Rahmani Center for Business and Government. And one of the things I do in my spare time is help to coordinate this course.
Great. All right. Okay,
Welcome
so
back,
we'll get
everyone.
started.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a privilege to be here.
Next slide. All right, so the overall goal of our project this semester was to try to help the residents of Seabright return to their homes as quickly as possible. And we're trying to do that through a four-part study of the city's budget, confirming the budget shortfall and financial sensitivity to reduced assessments as a result of the storm. We developed a decision tree, the purpose of which is to try to help residents navigate the many different state and federal programs that are available that may provide assistance to their rebuilding effort. We've also conducted a gap analysis. Rick has developed a model that estimates the amount of damage to each home and the amount of benefits the homeowner is likely to receive, and to figure out the gap between those two things, so we can get a robust estimate of just the size of the losses that the town is looking at. And lastly, Brett has done some benchmarking of previous disaster areas and how they cope with it and how their recovery got done. So we're looking to see what lessons we can learn from that. So some of the key things that we've found is that, well, in our last visit last week, we learned that around half of your residents are now back in their homes. So I think that's pretty good. On our first visit, it was only about 400, so I think it's rising pretty quickly. After the storm, the property damage was pretty much complete. 100% of the businesses were lost. Virtually the whole town, we think, registered with FEMA. We saw some pretty high numbers there, so that's a good thing. Not such a good thing, though, is that most of the aid that FEMA have distributed so far in New Jersey has just gone on hotel bills, temporary housing to tide people over. Very little of it, only about 14% of the money they've distributed, so far as we're aware, has been spent on actually repairing homes. So we need to try to fix that. And the other thing that we're going to discuss today is what is the impact of the reduced assessments on the delinquent taxis on the borough's finances. The residents are having a hard time, but if they don't pay their taxes, then that puts the whole borough in danger. So some of the major impediments to recovery. New Jersey has this prevailing wage law which says that anytime the public sector spends money, they have to pay prevailing wages to the workers who work on those projects. And the unfortunate thing about that for Seabright is that the wages, the prevailing wages, as determined by the government, are extremely high. We found that, for example, the official prevailing wage of a plumber is around $75 an hour. Whereas you could probably hire a plumber in the private sector for about half that, or even less than half that. So one of the major problems is that if we have to pay the prevailing wage to get all the work done that's done through the public sector, then it inflates the cost of everything. And since there's only so much money to go around, that means a lot of repairs might not get done. FEMA in previous cases has typically worked in areas that don't have this rule, or they just distributed the money directly to the homeowners so that they could conduct the repairs entirely in the private sector. So this is something new going on in New Jersey that we don't have much experience with. What we know for sure though is that the assistance they're delivering is probably not going to cover the full cost of the repairs. And under the hazard mitigation grant scheme, residents have to pay 25% of the cost of getting that work done. And if they did it themselves, it might actually be cheaper to pay 100% of it themselves than 25% of it through the public sector because of this prevailing wage law. And the other thing that's a major impediment to recovery is the changes to the flood mapping. The flood maps have all been changed, and I know that a lot of residents in the town dispute where the new zones are. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of things we can do about that because they're determined by Congress. But the maps are still not finalized and they may change. Okay, so the four things, the four components of our study: the budget analysis, the decision tree, the benchmarking, and the analysis. I'm going to pass off to Catherine now to talk about the budget.
So this is what you saw during the interim presentation a couple of weeks ago. The purpose really of this was more for our team to confirm the budget shortfall and understand the financial sensitivity that's related to the reduced assessments. So the data for this primarily came from Mike Bascom, the CFO, information he provided us over the phone, and the current year, the 2013 budget, which I think is still proposed. I wasn't able to confirm that, but also some prior year budgets. Also, we pulled records from the Monmouth County Assessor records and documents from the New Jersey Department of Community Affairs website. So this is the slide. So basically there's a balanced budget. There was a balanced budget last year pre-Sandy. 75% of revenues came from property taxes, and 82% of that property tax comes from residential properties. The operating budget is about 72% of the appropriations. There was annual debt service. It sounds like there's been a smart growth program that you've been investing in prior to the storm, and so that's, I think, where a lot of that money came from. And aside from the general fund, there are two other accounts: the sewer utility and the beach utility. And the town also had an A1 positive outlook bond rating. So post-Sandy, this is the proposed budget numbers. This is the same slide as before. I think some of these numbers need to be updated. But basically, you had an increase in miscellaneous revenues coming in from all of the outside funding sources to help with the aid for the storm. Yet there was a 25% loss in rateables. I think actually it was a 17% loss, and this 25% number was what had been estimated by the CFO, but it sounds like not as many people appealed their assessments as had been anticipated. So I think that loss is actually a little bit less than what is listed here, and I'll update these numbers after. Apologies. So then the appropriations, the projected shortfall, so there's a projected shortfall of $465,000 this year. The operating budget has increased by 22%, and also there's been basically a debt service increase of 22%, and more municipal statutory obligation increase for the year. There are also impacts to the sewer and beach utility budgets, and there is a potential impact to the bond rating, which is what Mike has mentioned, that it may go to a negative outlook, A1 bond rating. So just here, the aggregate assessed values have gone down. 2013 there was a sharp drop, and then the net debt has gone up. So that's impacting the town's budget. So basically, the findings from this, the finances have been significantly impacted by the storm. The assessed values have gone down, whereas the net debt has increased by 36%. Residents are the primary portion of the tax base and do need to repair and return to their homes to get that assessment to go back up. So that it makes sense that this is the place where Seabright is focusing. Potential consequences are that residents might foreclose or pay. There could be more delinquent tax payments where people are not paying on time, or people might hold on to damaged properties and not repair them, which keeps the assessment down. Seabright might also face pressure. Some properties might face pressure to sell to large developers. So that was just an overview of the budget, which actually was more for our team, but just so you know where our understanding of the situation, and that it does confirm that it makes sense for the residents to be the key focus, getting people to return to their homes. So next, Gareth will talk about the decision tree model, which is, if you want to look at the handout, it's this handout here.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk briefly about the pretty picture. The purpose of this diagram is to try to get on one page all of the available federal and state aid programs that residents of the town might qualify for. The state, just last week, finally printed the details of the aid programs that they're going to try to deliver with the $1.8 billion that they were given by the federal government. So we've added them to the latest version of the diagram, or the two that are most pertinent to the residents. The diagram also tries to capture the deadlines and eligibility criteria for each program, and because a lot of them you have to apply in a certain order, we've put that in the flow of the diagram as well. So in collecting the data to make this, we had conversations with a number of you. I contacted the Small Business Administration. I spoke to a guy from FEMA, and a lot of the data I collected from various websites online. So this is what you're looking at. So basically, it captures the different flows for 3 different groups of people: second homeowners, rental tenants, and primary residence owners. Most of the people in Seabright are going to be that green line, the primary residence owners, and that's good because they're the ones who are eligible for most aid. The first thing it asks you is, are you NFIP insured, or were you at the time of Sandy? If you were not, that changes your criteria and eligibility in different parts of the diagram. But basically, if you follow it through, for each rectangular box there's a little bit of information explaining what each one can do for you, how you can apply for it, or what the eligibility is and how much you might be able to get from it. The exclamations are pointing out deadlines. Unfortunately, the deadline is now passed for anyone who hadn't applied for an SBA loan or registered with FEMA yet, and if that's the case, then your eligibility for pretty much everything is near zero at this point. So some of the things we found out in the process of making this are that we think around 44% of Seabright homeowners did not have FEMA NFIP insurance, which is a pretty significant portion. 548 out of the 1,222 FEMA registrants did not have insurance. That said, despite not having insurance, they are still eligible for FEMA aid and SBA housing disaster loans if they are primary residents. So the second homeowners can't get this aid, but if they live in town and were living permanently in town at the time of the storm, then they will qualify. And that's 75% we estimate. In terms of the targeted information campaign, for each program we got a lot of confused information. I spoke to 3 people about the Small Business Administration loans, and I got 3 different answers on what the rates are and the eligibility. So one of the things that we were hoping this diagram would help clear up is just to get the real information out there that could hopefully be distributed to the residents. So for example, in terms of those SBA loans, there are basically 2 interest rates 1.688% if no credit is available elsewhere. Which basically means if you don't have the ability to borrow from a non-government source, then they will give you a loan at 1.688%. But if in assessing your creditworthiness they think that you can get a loan from a private bank, then the rate they're going to offer you is going to jump to 3.375%. So that's like completely backwards to how the loan market should work. Basically, the lower your credit score, the better your chance of getting a low interest loan from the SBA. I guess they're trying to encourage people who can get a loan from a private bank to do so, but that creates all kinds of negative incentives for the town. But that's just the way it is, unfortunately. Especially in the cases of the fact that 18% of the people in the town are over 65, so they might have particular problems navigating this complex system. And 40% of the town is making less than $60,000 a year. So those low-income residents are particularly vulnerable. One of the things that we wanted to mention is this, the Individuals and Households program that FEMA operates, the one that allows you to get up to $31,900. 86% of the aid that's been distributed so far in New Jersey has been spent on hotels through this program. But this program can fund repairs to homes. And we're not sure why so little of the resources available in this program are being used on repairs right now. Only 14% of the total that's being distributed. This program can pay to repair your windows, repair your roof, basically repair your building to get it back into a habitable state. It won't completely repair your building, obviously, particularly since it's limited to $31,900. But I think a lot of residents, well, we know that only 8 have actually hit this limit. 8 people out of the 1,222 in Seabright. So that means the vast majority of your residents have not maxed out the availability under that grant program, which means they might be able to claim some more money to help fund their repairs. And we're not sure if they're aware of that. So we're going to go into gap analysis.
All right. So we started out with an intent to look at what the potential costs of repairing residents of Seabright's homes, either townhouses, single-family homes, or condos. Because the focus, as Catherine had mentioned, is getting people back quickly to recover the tax base and to help with some of the budget shortfalls that are in place and potentially getting worse. So in order to do that, we developed a model in Excel that has various tabs that we'll go through, and we have some preliminary findings that we'll share with you. The main issue is to say, not really to guess at the entire town, but to construct a model that will look at an individual household level, to then aggregate that information towards the top and see how that looks. And then Catherine will show you, using spatial analysis, kind of where some of the potentially worse hit areas physically within the town are. So the information we used through the GIS office at Monmouth County and the tax assessor there, and then damage and repair estimates from Seabright staff. Now I'll pause here and just say that before we get into the next slide, this is really the key. This is the key driver of all of the results that we're going to show. So we're going to show you results that really are just getting started, and I don't want people to see a number and then think that we're done. Because the key issue that I'd like to come across today is that it's really in these property level analyses, and if we can start in a smaller group or even in this discussion to really hone in on some of these estimates, we can improve the results. So next slide. So the model in Excel starts off with a pivot table that looks at the losses. This is kind of the bottom line up front for condos and for homes. The second is a property summary, and you'll have access to this Excel file if you'd like. With a summary of all of the properties and tax information for the entire town. And then the third tab is property info. This is where the bulk of our analysis was done and the calculations were done. the lists and loss info, that's basically all of the different codes that are within the Monmouth County and within your own systems that codes each of these properties to tell us what it is. You know, it's item 4C. Well, what's 4C? So it's a lookup table to try and tell us what that is. And then also, this contains the loss info, the estimates that we're looking at. Then there's a distribution tab that looks at the condos and the condos and the single-family residences to give it look at a frequency distribution to see what the average values are and what the range is, etc., etc. The decision tree is a tab in Excel that takes what Gareth did in a chart and brings it into Excel so that we can apply some of this thought process to it. However, the decision tree in Excel is not updated for what we've come up with since last Friday. So it's from that aspect of the model is still from April. Insurance and aid amounts is another tab to look up what the estimates are from what the potential payouts would be, and then percentage. This is a placeholder for looking at things like who has insurance, who doesn't, of the people who have insurance, who could fall out in different places along this funding diagram. So next slide. So as I mentioned, the key issue that we're looking at is in this bottom right-hand corner. We're looking at estimated damage between condos and condo we came up with is anything with unit in the property address. That's the way we did it. We pulled that out. If it says unit, it's a condo. If that's right, if that's wrong, that's what we did. And then the residential property. So what we did is we came up with an estimate of what the dollar value, low, average, and high would be for various properties. And then we also came up with an estimate of what the insurance payouts would be in a percentage form. So we can talk about this in greater detail and we can talk about why. The main thing I wanted to say here is these are placeholders. If these are wrong, if we can get any better precision on these numbers, the entire model will be better. So I just want to emphasize that. And then the other key issue is in the top left-hand corner, these special tax codes. So when we were talking with Trish, and we're trying to go through our Monmouth County data and the data that she has, she pulled out these special tax codes, and we thought, this is individual level data that, I mean, we have no idea how much damage exists for the properties in Seabright, and we were going to ask Nancy to guess, or Reed to guess on a property by property level. Maybe you can do that, maybe you can't, but what we thought is that at least this, so, you know, the town has, the way I understand it, the town has hired an assessor to come in and get a drive-by estimate of what the damage is for the property. Now, clearly the intent is to apply for tax assessment. Is this the absolute right thing to use for our purposes? No. But is it a proxy? Yes. So that's what we're using. So basically what we did is we tied these estimates to the special tax codes at a property level. There were about 50% of the properties had this, the tax code assessment adjusted. So the other 50% we used averages. And you know, should we have done that? Should we assume that they're zero? Should we assume they're on the low side? We can talk. But next slide. So this is the second tab in our Excel model, and this just looks at the Monmouth County data for Seabright, and you can see there are church and charitable properties, exempt properties, etc. But we're coming up with a total count of 1,306 properties with a $9.3 million tax base for the entire town. And then where the focus of our study, as we've mentioned, are the 524 condos that we've estimated, and the residential properties, 515 of them. Next slide. So, again, this is a placeholder, and I don't want everyone to latch on to this $55 million, but that is the result of our study, meaning, and let's be clear, we did not finish the FEMA and other types of outside flow. Right now, this is looking at what we think the town's projected shortfall is based on insurance and these estimates. But if we update the basic estimates that we have, this number can get quite a bit better. So we did already talk about the number of properties, the taxes. The total loss is about $75 million, and it comes out to about a $55 million shortfall. Next slide. Here are the distribution of the properties. So the average assessed value for residences is about $458,000, and with a high of $1.9 million. Condos are, for obvious reasons, a little bit lower than that, $276,000, with a high of $709,000. The distribution is somewhat normal, and these are skewed obviously towards the. The chart didn't really come out well on this slide. But this starts from 200,000 up to 2 million. So, but you can see there is some relatively normal distribution around those means. Next slide. Catherine is going to talk now, based on these numbers at a parcel level, then how they translate to the map.
Alright, so these are the maps that you have in front of you, and I really love maps, so I think that they're really useful and when you're trying to conceptualize what's happening in an area. My understanding, I think, from our interim presentation was that you tend to split Seabright into North Beach, Downtown, and South Beach. I didn't have the exact location of where those are, but I did notice the two very dense areas of, I just called this area here North Beach, and then this area Downtown. I hope that that is close to accurate. Okay. Okay, good. So, the first thing that we did was look at the assessment value per square foot, just to determine where the assessment values tend to be higher for properties in Seabright. And we found, if you look at the map, it's color coded, so the darker the color is the higher the value per square foot. And the mean value for the North Beach area is the highest. It's $161 per square foot, whereas the downtown area is $141 per square foot. And that's important because the taxes are based on this assessment value. Next slide. So then what we did is, taking the information that Rick just discussed about the residential gap, the 55 million, we have that data at a property by property level. So what we did is we looked at what is the distribution of that across Seabright. So basically, this is an estimate of the difference between the cost of repairs and the insurance payouts, the estimated amount per parcel in Seabright. So we just did this for residential properties. So the black areas are all of the commercial or no value shown properties. There were some errors in the data, just so you know. It wasn't a perfect data set. But then everything from the yellow is the least amount of loss to the dark red is the most amounts of estimated repair gap. One thing to note is that this model uses a fixed estimate for damage. So I think Rick showed the ranges of like $55,000 to $75,000. So there was some fixed range that he used. It was not a percentage of property value, so that can impact what this looks like on a parcel level. Perhaps a better way to estimate this would be a percentage of property value. So if you said something was moderately damaged, perhaps that should then be 55% damage of a property, as opposed to say $55,000 worth of damage. So that's something to think about, the estimate, as we go forward. But compared to this repair gap, it looks like North Beach had the highest amount of total estimated damage on average per parcel at $46,000. Downtown had the lowest of these four. I split it into 4 different regions here, which you can see on the map. So this is the North Beach area, and then this downtown area had the lowest for all 4 areas at $34,000. So next slide. So then what this does is it takes, basically this model here takes the estimated funding gap to the assessed value to determine if there is a large funding gap, how does that relate to what the property is actually worth. So this actually, because we used fixed numbers to estimate damage as opposed to a percentage, this actually reverses the results where properties that tend to be smaller and have a lower value will tend to have a higher ratio between their estimated funding gap, and their assessed value. So in this case, it looks like downtown is the piece that is in the most need of assistance with a ratio of 0.17, which was the highest for all 4 portions of Seabright. And then North Beach had the reverse. It was the lowest at 0.10. And then again, the black areas are the non-residential parcels, or no data shown. Next slide. So then this is something called inverse distance weighting, which is just a way to look at, are there certain neighborhood trends in the data sets? It's a very rough estimate, but what it can do is really highlight if there are certain areas where there tends to be a trend. So for instance, it takes, each parcel basically becomes a data point, and then it sort of takes the average of all the data points around and then spreads it over that area. So you can see, and this shows even more clearly than the last map. So this is the previous map. This shows more clearly that the downtown area has the highest ratios of estimated damage to assessed value. You can see this, the high ratios are this darker color here, whereas the North Beach and the other areas are a lot lighter in color. And the blue, it tends to be most of the non-residential properties. Next slide. And then here, this wasn't so much related to the estimated damage, but this shows the FEMA map up close. There are when you are using GIS, there are sometimes issues with the boundaries, but because I was combining 2 different types of data, but this shows the boundaries up close, and then I compared it to where the ratios from the previous map. So you can kind of see where the boundary goes and how the damage ratios do not really correlate with the boundary. Don't know if that would be useful for you, but I figured it would be. It's helpful to look at what that FEMA map is. I know it's important. And then next slide. So basically, just to summarize this section of the analysis, as Rick mentioned, the total estimated funding needed for the town is about $55 million, according to the assumptions that we used. The model estimates that downtown Seabright has the highest estimated loss ratios, whereas the North Beach area has the highest total loss estimates, which could be important in terms of thinking about where you may want to focus on helping residents to get back into their homes if there's a certain region you want to focus on. Also, what's really important is that the assessed property values appear to have an approximately normal distribution. This means that another way to approach this could be to do some type of statistical analysis to estimate damage and funding gaps. Something to keep in mind that is an option and could provide a potentially more robust analysis of this. So next, I think Brett will talk about the benchmarking. He'll compare these results to other areas.
Good afternoon, everybody. Just to kind of put this work into some context, so what we've seen so far is a lot of quantitative technical work based around figuring out how much money are we short. Could be 55 million, could be higher, could be lower. We're not entirely sure, based on the model's assumptions. But now, the focus of my work has emphasized, okay, whatever that number is, how have other communities who have faced similar disasters tried to meet that shortfall? And so, comparing natural disasters is sort of an exercise in futility because every place is kind of its own, sort of sui generis, but there are also some commonalities among them. And so what I tried to do is focus on the most, to the extent that they are comparable, the most comparable disasters. And I focused on the tornado in Joplin, Missouri, and then Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. I focused on 2 smaller neighborhood examples within New Orleans. So again, the purpose is to acquire some qualitative data, complement some of the technical aspects that we've seen so far, show some of the ways that these communities got some of this financing met, and then I don't intend to tell you or give you an idea that you probably haven't heard or thought of yourselves, but even if there is no new idea on the slide you see, that may give an extent of the limits or the range of different sources that may be available for some of this gap financing. And this data that you'll see came from various government documents, from state, local, and federal sources, books, websites from the relevant community organizations, etc. So the first study is Joplin, Missouri. So the tornado came through there, and the primary sources of aid that I found were mostly federal and state government. LIHTCs, low-income housing tax credits, community development block grants, and then the state government in Missouri had a number of agencies that were able to divert funds of some sort or another to residential financing assistance. And The biggest non-governmental organization I saw was Habitat for Humanity, but that was sort of the range of characters that were involved in helping that community to recover. Next slide, please. So Broadmoor is a neighborhood within New Orleans that after there were a series of studies done to assess how the city would look after recovery from Katrina, and the Broadmoor neighborhood, which was kind of for those of you who know New Orleans, it's sort of shaped like a bowl, and Broadmoor's at the bottom of that bowl. And they just had that designated as green space. They're not coming back. We're not going to rebuild that neighborhood. That's what was said in the first wave of municipal replanning and so forth. And so what the neighborhood did is organize itself. They were very politically active, and they basically, saying they pulled themselves up by the bootstraps is a bit inaccurate, but that was more or less what they had to do because they had no government help, they had no government source, so they had to find whatever sources they could to help them do so. And so they had a very extensive 6-point partnership. I have to also say they worked with the Kennedy School. So they reached out to different neighborhoods, faith communities, residential developers, universities, businesses, the government, and they just went around and asked. It found different ways. Walter Isaacson, the Time magazine leader, that came from this neighborhood, and so it was very much a personal element that just said, hey, Walter, you're from the neighborhood, your best friend's family, your mom and dad still live here. Can you help out? And there's of course the Bruce Springsteen element here. We need not go visit that based on what Reed said earlier. But I think, Mayor, you'd mentioned even the question of forming a CDC, and this was something that the neighborhood did to help gather money for rebuilding homes. And to this day, they're still rebuilding different homes in the neighborhood, but that was a vehicle that they found useful for solving their problem. I'm not sure that it would immediately apply to what Seabright needs, but that was one answer to their problem. Next slide, please. Another neighborhood in New Orleans was in New Orleans East. It was a very poor part of the city, and in particular, there's a strong Vietnamese community there, and they also formed a CDC that still operates and has a lot of the same function. And they partnered with Kellogg Foundation, NeighborWorks America. These were just different groups that had some resources that they had some personal connection to. And because it was a Vietnamese neighborhood, they also partnered with the National Alliance of Vietnamese American Service Agencies. And so the reason that I bring all this up is this is what people who face as close of a problem to what you guys are facing, this is what they've done. And I know from the preliminary conversations we've had that you guys have been thinking along these lines, and I guess my basic point is that y'all are on the right track, and that this is how people have done it, and there's no other more innovative thing that I've seen, at least in my research. So again, just sort of the general findings. Most funding will probably come from state and federal government sources, and this I think advice would have been more useful 2 or 3 weeks ago before all the announcements about federal government grants through the state of New Jersey, which may or may not be effective or helpful. That's another thing that I'm not really qualified to comment on. And then the rest of it will just come from personal relationships that members of the community have. And again, the last point was just there's only so much you can extrapolate from a New Orleans or a Joplin, Missouri, because Seabright is its own community with its own parameters and constraints. But in addition to, again, some of the quantitative things that we've been looking at, this is another sort of series of case studies that I hope is helpful. Thank you.
So, next steps. We're graduating soon.
You think?
Dina can appreciate that as well. So if we had one more month, what would we do? And we think we're on the right track. What we're here today to do, we came up with a $55 million number. I don't want that to be the takeaway, actually. I'd like that to be kind of a placeholder, and the takeaway is, what can we do to improve the numbers? That really is what would make me feel good. So if we had one more month, here's what we would do. We'd lock down this decision tree, and I think we have some confirmation today that what's here is kind of the universe, and it's done. And that in and of itself is kind of, so check that one down, we're good. And that can now be brought in black and white, and in red, blue, and green, can be brought to people in the community to kind of help them face the actual reality of what their choices are and are not. And I think that can help. The other thing is clear up some discrepancies in the numbers, the number of parcels, the classifications of properties. I think, because a lot of the estimates that we have, we're using Monmouth County. I went through a couple things with Trish, trying to just go through and say, hey, should these be labeled like this? Who knows the town? Who wants to go through that property info that we're using, that we were provided? But to say, well, here are the discrepancies between them, because that can have a real impact on the number, on the result. Then revise the estimates. First of all, are the special tax codes even a reasonable place to start? We think so. What's your gut feel? How maybe could we adjust it? If they use 50%, should we use 60? Should we use 45? Is there some type of adjustment that we can make to qualitatively change the quantitative number that they've provided, but at least as a starting place? And then for those that are missing, what can we do in order to get a number? Is using the average the right thing to do? And is there a better way? This is what we've come up with. Trish waved this piece of paper. I was like, aha, eureka, I found it. That's what we want. Is there something better? We don't know. Maybe you do. But as we've kind of created something for you, a model that is, it's alive, and it can be, it takes someone to just sit there and think it through, and we can help you do that. We're turning it over, but there's plenty of more work that can be done, and maybe there's a better way. The other thing is and I emphasized this from the very beginning, the property damage costs and the ranges, are those good? And then the other thing too is we were talking about a dollar figure for these costs, but really perhaps a percentage figure is the right thing to do. So if the assessed value is 1.9 million, saying, some type of, if they don't have one of the property codes, then they get a 50%, then they just go with the average, which is 100,000. And that just won't make a lot of sense. I don't know if I lost anyone there.
Yeah, I got you.
Okay, so, so maybe that's the way to be thinking about it. But again, this is a placeholder and a way to start. And then, the insurance payout percentages, are those about right, or those, and then the other thing is, what are you interested in? Because insurance pays out, for your couch and for your TV, and that's kind of interesting. But I think when we're talking about what the goal for the town is to recover the tax base, then what you're really interested in is forget the dollar amount, but what can the property actually be salvaged to the point where the assessed value goes up and someone can live in it. If they don't get their TV, it's too bad. But that's less relevant. And so how do we figure that into this analysis? How do we decouple just kind of the recovering the property versus actually recovering the damage to the contents? And then the last thing, link the updated decision tree into the model. We were here last Friday, and this is finals week for us, so I've taken it kind of this far, but I wasn't able to update the decision tree in the Excel file to then say, how can we bring in these funds on top of the insurance funds? But that would be where we would go. And then Catherine mentioned this before, but there is some normal type of distribution. It's not perfect, but there's a normal type of distribution to the condo and the residential homes. So with that, you can be doing some statistical analysis, and this is really important. We can do some statistical analysis to say, okay, well, what would be the ranges? And if you want to do Monte Carlo simulation or whatever, but you could have an estimate of really where the ranges are. And then we could say, well, 55 million, maybe we come up with it's 75 million, and worst case, it's 30 million, and it could be as much as 120, and we feel pretty good about that. Not as in the numbers, but we feel confident.
We feel great about 120 million.
But we feel confident that the number is useful to then bring to outside agencies to say this is the type of help that we're looking for. So next slide. So the last thing that we all wanted to say is to thank you. This has been a fun project for all of us to be working on for a variety of reasons. We've learned a ton, and we didn't know anything about how, well, Brett did, about the FEMA issues and kind of some of these disaster recoveries. It was also fascinating for all of you to present yourselves personally in the stories. Everyone we talked to kind of whether it was the engineer, whether it was anyone, had to talk about that day and what it was like. And the people, you know, we were in Trisha's desk and she's showing us the water line for one of the homes that she went into that was, and then there was still water in the dryer. Because, you know, so just stories like that were really touching, and we really appreciate kind of what you've gone through. And then lastly, I mean, as someone who's from the state of New Jersey, when I found out about this project, it's the reason I took the class, right? So I wanted to come here and try and help. So for that, for opening up yourselves up and for taking all of the time that you did for the visits that we came down and really trying to help us out, I just wanted to say thank you. It's been fun.
Thank you.